first accessory you should get for your Osmo Pocket 3 is an ND or variable ND filter, like the one I'm using to film this right now. Here's a shot with and without the Freewell variable ND filter fitted to my Pocket 3. On the left is without the filter, on the right is with the filter. You'll probably think the one on the right looks smoother, less digital and more movie-like or cinematic looking. It's all to do with motion blur, which is the little bits of blur between each frame of a video when you watch it back. If we zoom into a frame in these examples, the one without the variable ND filter has no motion blur, but the one with the filter has this blur. To get motion blur, you need to be able to control the shutter speed, and to control the shutter speed, you need to be able to control the amount of light getting into the sensor on the camera. You can control the amount of light getting to a sensor by using the aperture, the shutter speed, the ISO or ND filters. The thing is, on the Pocket 3 you can't change the aperture, it's fixed to f2.0, so you're left with shutter speed, ISO or ND filters. If you do want this motion blur, your shutter speed is going to be limited to, which I'll get to in just a second. So basically that just leaves you with ISO or ND filters to be able to control the light on your Pocket 3. Even if you turn down your ISO to the minimum on the Pocket 3, which is 50 ISO, on a bright day, there's still going to be too much light hitting the sensor. I really hate March flies. Anyway, this leaves you with the only other option, and that's to use ND filters or variable ND filters to reduce the amount of light getting to the sensor. Of course, if you're shooting at night or in darker conditions or in a studio where you can control the brightness of the lights, you probably won't need an ND filter at all. Had to get back in the car because I was being eaten alive. It's a bit weird, eh? So I mentioned shutter speed earlier. There's a simple formula that you can use, and that's to take your frame rate and then just double it. So for example, if you're shooting at 30 frames a second, you want to use a 1/60th shutter speed. If you're shooting 60 frames a second, you'd be using 120th for your shutter speed. And if you're using 24 frames a second, double that would be 48, but the closest you're going to get on the Pocket 3 is 1/50th of a second. I've already done an in-depth video on how to use ND filters with your Pocket 3 and also how to set custom shutter speeds. I'll put a link to that in the description and also at the end of this video. Let's talk about these particular variable ND filters from Freewell. A variable ND filter lets you change the amount of light reduction by simply changing a dial on the front of the filter. You can also get fixed ND filters. These don't have a dial and they come in specific strengths, so if you want to change the strength, you have to change the entire filter. This is a practical review of these Freewell filters, showing what you can achieve with them versus with no filter. I'm hoping to get my hands on some other filters in the future, so if that's interesting to you, please subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. This set we're looking at today contains two variable ND filters, one with a strength of 1 to 5 stops and the other has a strength of 6 to 9 stops. As you increase the stop value, less light gets through the filters. So when it comes to build quality, overall the build quality of these things seems pretty good. Some variable ND filters, when you turn the dial on the front, they don't have end stops, so you can actually go past the maximum and the minimum stops of light reduction, which can cause weird artifacts. Luckily, these ones do have hard stops at the beginning and end ranges of the individual filters' stop ranges. So there's no clicks for the numbers on these things, you can just turn them however you want. So that makes it a bit trickier if you want to dial in a specific stop of ND, but it also means that you can freely choose between values to get exactly what you want on screen. The dials themselves are smooth and easy to turn, and they have these little ridges which makes it easier to grip and turn them even if you're just using the side of your thumb. Even my big fat hands can manage it, so it must be okay. These filters are magnetic, so it makes it super easy to attach them to your Pocket 3. They just snap into place, and they come with what Freewell describes as a durable coating. Freewell state that they're resistant to dust, scratches, oil and water, and that they have a colour neutral coating. We'll get to colour cast in just a minute. This case itself is pretty decent. It's just a plastic case, but it's hard. It's going to keep your filters nice and safe inside. But this clip hinge here, it feels like it could break after a lot of uses. There's just a tiny thin bit of plastic. Inside the case, it's very gently magnetic, and that means it makes it easier to get the filters back into place. But I would actually prefer it if they pulled in a bit stronger, so they just went straight into the grooves where these filters are supposed to sit in the case. You also get this teeny tiny cleaning cloth, but it's not small enough to fold up and fit evenly on the top of the case, so you're better off getting a proper lens cloth if you don't mind carrying one around with you. Let's talk about image quality next, and the first thing to understand is that a variable ND filter will never be as good as a fixed ND filter of a similar level of quality. Variable ND filters mean you need to carry less filters, which means less to carry around and less to lose. Variable ND filters can also be cheaper because you don't have to buy as many of them. In this case, we only have to carry around and buy 2, and they're really good for fast filmmaking or run and gun filmmaking or vlogging. And the other thing is, I think they're a bit easier if you're just getting started with the whole concept amount of ND filters because you can just turn a dial and see how things feel and look. When it comes to vignetting for these filters, there doesn't appear to be any significant vignetting with either the 1 to 5 or 6 to 9 stop filters. Depending on where the sun is, and because variable NDs use polarizers, you may get darker sections of sky, and for comparison this is the same bit of sky with no filter. Let's talk next about color cast, and one problem all variable ND filters and fixed ND filters can sometimes suffer from to a lesser or greater degree is that they can affect the colors in the image. If we go from this shot with no filters onto this one with the Freewell set at 1 stop, the first thing that hits you is the polarization and the big jump in saturation. This is because variable ND filters are made with polarizers, and polarizers can saturate colors amongst other things. The image also does seem to get a little bit warmer. Check my arms and my grey t-shirt when compared to the no filter fitted image. As the stops increase, that oversaturated look goes away, but still keeps the colors looking punchy. All of the stops seem to introduce a warming or maybe a slight tan color to the image. You can see from this parade that at 5 stops it looks like there's a bit more red than with no filter, and it also looks like there's a bit less blue than with no filter attached. This is not a super scientific lab test, but I hope this gives you an idea of what you can expect when you're using these filters yourself. Let's talk next about sharpness. All of the samples you're about to see have the default sharpness settings for the Pocket 3. At 1 stop there does appear to be a drop off in sharpness. It almost looks a bit plasticky. Look at my forehead compared with no filter, but this could be due to the super saturation and polarization that we saw earlier, as there's no highlights on my forehead, all of which could be giving the impression of softness. At 2 stops and above, things look a lot better with regards to sharpness, but I'll let you make your own mind up. If you look at this non-zoomed in clip from earlier in the video, this was with 6 stops. It looks perfectly fine regarding sharpness. There does, however, appear to be a drop off in sharpness towards the edges of the frame. If you look at the grass, for example, at the bottom left, this is with no filter attached. When we add the 1 to 5 stop filter, notice things get a little bit softer. This is apparent all the way from 1 to 5 stops. Interestingly, the 6 to 9 stop filter at 6 stops and maybe about 7 stops is noticeably less soft at the edges, but the edge softness starts to return about 7 and is fully back by 8 and 9 stops. The center seems fine enough, it's just the edges that seem to get soft. When it comes to contrast seems okay throughout the range of stops. There are some minor contrast shifts though at some of the stops. For example, look at the trees between 6 and 7 stops here. When we go to 7, contrast does seem to increase a little bit. So what can we conclude from those tests? Well, the first is to understand that variable NDs will never be as high a quality as fixed NDs at the same price or quality bracket, but they do offer things that fixed NDs don't. You need less of them. In this case, we only need 2 filters to go from 1 all the way through to 9 stops of light reduction. That means there's less to carry, and they're also a lot quicker to use than fixed NDs, because if you want to change the amount of light reduction, you just change the dial on the front. And they can also be more cost effective. Individual Freewell ND filters retail at about $19.99 US, and to get the same range of ND reduction, you'd need to buy 9 of them to replicate these 2 filters. That means it's going to cost you $179.91 to buy individual filters for all of those stops. This pack of 2 variable ND filters, on the other hand, costs $69.99 US. That's less than half the price of buying all of the individual filters. If you're a run and gun filmer, a vlogger, or even a beginner, these variable ND filters offer a great place to start at a reasonable price point. If you have more time when you're filming and you don't mind changing filters more often and carrying more around with you, and you want the absolute best image quality you can, then fixed ND filters might be a better choice for you. Hopefully I'll have some Pocket 3 fixed ND filters to review soon. Links to these filters will be in the video description, and this is the video that you want to watch next if you want to get the absolute best out of your Osmo Pocket 3. I'm Jason Roberts, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.